My brother's wedding planner called me on a Tuesday morning. Her voice was shaking so hard, I could hear the nervous rattle of her breath against the phone's receiver. She said, "Your family canceled your invitation, but asked to keep the $50,000 deposit you paid." I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline, and I said, "Cancel the entire wedding." She gasped. I could hear the sheer, unadulterated panic in her voice. "But sir, you're not the groom. You can't just do that." I kept my voice perfectly calm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my chest. "No, Amanda, I'm not the groom. But I own the venue, the catering company, the fleet of Rolls-Royces, and the hotel chain they booked for the guests. Thank you for being here. Grab a warm cup of water, sit down, and listen to me tell the whole story. My name is Elijah. I am 30 years old, and up until that dreary Tuesday morning, I was universally known as the ultimate disappointment of my family. I was the black sheep, the guy who threw away a brilliant future for a foolish pipe dream. At the exact moment that phone call came through, I was sitting in my corner office on the top floor of a high-rise building, a building I own a significant stake in, reviewing the quarterly financial reports for my hospitality empire. The rain was beating softly against the glass, a rhythmic sound that usually helped me focus. Then, my assistant buzzed my intercom to say someone from Elegant Events was on the line regarding the Henderson Miller wedding. That was my younger brother, Julian. He was marrying his college sweetheart, Jennifer, and the wedding was only 3 weeks away. It was supposed to be the social event of the season for my parents. I almost didn't take the call. I was in the middle of a complex merger negotiation and figured it was just a routine question from the planner. Maybe they needed me to sign another authorization form or confirm a dietary restriction. 6 months prior, my mother had come to my apartment, practically in tears, claiming Julian was drowning in wedding costs and the stress was tearing his relationship apart. I didn't hesitate for a single second. I wrote a check for $50,000 to cover the venue and the premium vendor deposits. I just wanted my little brother to have a good day. The family didn't even know the money came from me. My mother promised she would keep it an absolute secret so Julian wouldn't feel bad taking charity from his struggling, unpredictable older brother. So I picked up the phone. Amanda from Elegant Events sounded terrified right from the start. She cleared her throat twice before she could even force the words out. She told me my own parents and my brother had contacted the agency the day before. They explicitly, unequivocally demanded that my name be permanently removed from the master guest list. They told Amanda there was a deep-seated family disagreement, and that my presence would ruin the aesthetic, the mood, and the reputation of the celebration. I felt a cold, hard knot form in the pit of my stomach. The rejection hit me like a physical blow right to the ribs. The air was sucked out of the room. But then Amanda dropped the real bombshell. She stammered out that my family wanted to ensure that the $50,000 deposit remained securely attached to their account. They were kicking me out of the most important day of my brother's life, but they were keeping my money. They wanted my wallet, but not my presence. I set my expensive fountain pen down on my mahogany desk. The click echoed in the quiet room. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't throw anything. I just asked Amanda a very simple, very direct question. I asked her who owned Elegant Events. She was confused. I could hear her furiously rustling through paperwork on her end, her breath hitching. She told me it was owned by a corporate entity called Sterling Event Holdings. I asked her who owned Sterling Event Holdings. A longer, more agonizing pause followed. Finally, she said it was part of the Sterling Hospitality Group. That is when I told her exactly who she was speaking to. I told her I am the CEO and sole owner of Sterling Hospitality Group. The silence on the phone was absolute. It was deafening. I told her to cancel their reservation at the Grand Harbor Hotel. I told her to cancel Symphonic Catering. I told her to cancel the exotic floral arrangements they ordered from Premier Botanicals, the elite photography package from Lens and Light Studios, and the prestige transportation limousine service. Every single vendor they had booked for this extravagant affair was a subsidiary of my company. Amanda started hyperventilating. She begged me to reconsider. She told me the wedding was in 3 weeks, that they had 200 high-profile guests, and that this would utterly destroy the event and her career. I told her her job was perfectly safe. Then I instructed her to refund any deposits paid by the guests for accommodations, send my family a bill for the full amount they owed for breaking the contracts late, and deduct my original $50,000 as a non-refundable cancellation fee. Then I hung up the phone. I sat there in the quiet of my office, watching the rain. I wasn't just a discarded brother anymore. I was a man who had finally truly had enough. But to understand how a family could treat their own flesh and blood with such callous disregard, you have to understand where this all started. 8 years ago, I did the unthinkable. I committed the ultimate sin in my parents' eyes. I walked out of Harvard Business School. I didn't fail out. I wasn't expelled for bad behavior. I was actually near the top of my class. But I simply woke up one day and realized that the traditional corporate path, the endless ladder climbing, the soul-crushing boardroom politics, was not going to give me the life I envisioned. I saw a massive, untapped gap in the luxury event and hospitality market. People wanted experiences, not just services, and the existing companies were stagnant. I had a clear, burning vision of how to fill that gap. But to my parents, Robert and Mary, I might as well have committed a felony. I remember the exact day I came home to tell them. The air in their sprawling suburban house was thick, smelling of my mother's expensive lavender potpourri and floor wax. My father was sitting in his leather armchair, reading the financial section of the Sunday paper. When I stood in the living room and told them I had formally withdrawn from my classes to start my own business from scratch, the room exploded. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He stood up so fast he knocked his coffee mug over, throwing the newspaper onto the glass coffee table. He told me I was a fool, an arrogant, ungrateful child. He screamed that I was throwing away a guaranteed 6-figure salary, that I was spitting on the sacrifices they made. He brought up the college fund they had painstakingly built for me, claiming I had flushed it down the drain. My mother just wept. It wasn't the quiet weeping of a concerned parent. It was the theatrical, devastated sobbing of a woman whose social standing had just been threatened. She looked at me like I was a stranger who had broken into her home. She asked me, her voice trembling with genuine horror, what she was supposed to tell her friends at the country club. That was always her primary concern, how things looked to the outside world. The facade was everything. And then there was Julian. Julian was the golden child. 2 years younger than me, he was already on the fast track to law school, perfectly molding himself into the exact son my parents demanded. While my father was yelling at me, threatening to disown me, Julian sat on the plush velvet couch, shaking his head with this smug, condescending look on his face. He didn't defend me. He didn't try to calm our father down. He actually had the nerve to look at my mother, pat her hand, and say, "Don't worry, Mom. At least one of your sons will be a successful lawyer. I promise I won't let you down like this." From that day on, I was branded the family failure, the disappointment. My father threatened to cut me completely out of his inheritance, screaming that not a single dime of his money would go to funding a delusional party-planning hobby. I told him to keep his money. I didn't want his inheritance. I wanted his belief in me. I wanted his support. But that was gone, replaced entirely by contempt. I packed my bags that same night. I didn't take anything they had bought me. I moved into a cramped, leaky studio apartment on the bad side of town, where the radiator rattled all night and the window looked out over a brick wall. I was entirely cut off. Whenever there was a family gathering, Thanksgiving or Christmas, the atmosphere was suffocating. I was treated like a charity case, a cautionary tale they allowed at the table out of sheer obligation. My parents would loudly, aggressively praise Julian for passing his exams, for getting a prestigious internship, for simply existing. When it came to me, they would use this quiet, pitying voice that felt like acid on my skin. "So, Elijah," my father would say, slicing his turkey, "how is your little party-planning hobby going? Are you making enough to keep the lights on? You know, the firm is always looking for mailroom clerks." I tried to tell them. I really desperately did. I would try to explain my business model, the small corporate contracts I was securing, the long-term vision I had for a unified hospitality brand. But my father would just wave his hand dismissively, roll his eyes, and change the subject back to Julian's latest mock trial victory. I learned very quickly that they didn't want me to succeed on my own terms. They wanted me to fail so they could be right. They wanted me to come crawling back, broken and humiliated, begging for a junior position at some firm my father had connections with. I refused to give them that satisfaction. I swallowed my pride, kept my mouth shut at dinner, chewed my food in silence, and went back to work. I used their doubt as fuel. The first 3 years of building my company were brutal, soul-crushing work. I was putting in 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I slept on a lumpy, stained sofa in my cramped, unheated office more often than I slept in my own bed. I started out just planning small corporate team-building gatherings and low-budget boutique weddings. I did all the heavy lifting myself. I negotiated intensely with stubborn caterers, dealt with flaky venue owners, carried chairs, swept floors after events, and slowly, painstakingly built a network of reliable contacts. That's when I met Nathan. Nathan was a brilliant, fiercely driven operations manager who had been laid off from a major hotel chain due to corporate restructuring. He was angry at the corporate world and hungry to build something real. He believed in my vision when literally nobody else did, not even my own blood. Together, we became a two-man army. We started looking for opportunities to expand vertically. We found a small, run-down event venue on the outskirts of the city that was on the verge of bankruptcy. The paint was peeling, the roof leaked, and the carpets smelled like stale beer. I poured every single dime I had, maxed out 3 credit cards, and took a massive personal risk to acquire it. Nathan and I renovated it ourselves at night. We rebranded it, marketed it aggressively, and within a year it was fully booked out for weddings every weekend. We took those profits and immediately rolled them into the next venture. We didn't buy fancy clothes or cars. We bought a catering company, then a boutique hotel downtown that was mismanaged. We were aggressive, incredibly smart about our margins, and completely invisible to the mainstream business world because we operated entirely under a holding company name, Sterling Event Holdings. As my empire secretly grew, my family's disdain for me somehow grew right along with it. By year 4, I owned 6 venues across 3 states. By year 6, I had acquired the Grand Harbor Hotel, a massive waterfront property, and a fleet of luxury vehicles for high-end transportation. I was a millionaire several times over, but I still drove a modest sedan to family dinners because I wanted them to ask about me, not my money. I remember one specific Sunday dinner vividly. I had just closed the deal on a fleet of brand-new, custom-ordered Rolls-Royces for our VIP transport division. It was a massive milestone, a multi-million-dollar contract that cemented my company's status in the luxury market. I was exhausted, running on empty, but profoundly proud. I sat at the dining room table, cutting my steak, and during a lull in the conversation, I casually mentioned, "I just secured a fleet of Rolls-Royces for the business. It's a big step forward." My mother paused, her fork hovering in the air. She looked at me with this terrible, deeply sad expression, as if I had just told her I was diagnosed with a terminal illness. "Oh, Elijah," she sighed heavily. "Are you driving people around now? Is it like an upscale taxi service? Oh, sweetheart, if you need money to pay your rent, your father can help you find a real job. There's no shame in asking for help." Julian laughed out loud. He had just gotten a massive promotion at his law firm and was wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass. "Hey, man," Julian smirked, his voice dripping with condescension. "If I ever need a ride to the airport, I'll be sure to call your little taxi service. Do you have to wear a little chauffeur hat and white gloves?" Under the table, my phone vibrated. I looked down. It was a text from Nathan. He had sent a photo of the finalized contract we just signed, securing our dominance in the regional market. I looked back up at my brother's sneering face. "Sure, Julian," I said softly. "I'll give you a ride anytime." I didn't argue. I didn't pull out my bank statements and shove them in his face. I just let them believe what they desperately wanted to believe. It was easier that way. But the isolation was a heavy, suffocating blanket. I was building a kingdom, a literal empire of hospitality, but I was doing it completely alone in the dark. The real reason my family's attitude toward me shifted from mere pity to outright toxic hostility took me years to figure out. It wasn't just my decision to leave Harvard. The well had been actively poisoned. Venom was being dripped into their ears by people I actually thought I could trust. I had an old college friend named Dylan. Dylan and I used to be incredibly close, but we drifted apart when I started my business. He went into corporate finance and loved nothing more than to brag about his end-of-year bonuses and his luxury vacations. About 4 years into my business journey, things were incredibly tight. I was highly leveraged, constantly buying up new properties, and cash flow was a daily, terrifying puzzle. I confided in Dylan over a beer one night at a local dive bar. I told him that the stress of the debt was keeping me awake at night, that I felt like I was walking a tightrope without a net. I told him in strict, brotherly confidence. I didn't know that Dylan was frequently running into my parents at various high society social events and charity galas. Dylan, wanting to make himself look like a massive, unparalleled success by comparison, vastly exaggerated my struggles. He told my father that I was practically bankrupt, that I was drowning in shady, high-interest loans, and that my entire business was a complete house of cards ready to collapse. He painted me as a desperate, pathetic failure who was likely to come begging the family to bail me out to avoid jail time. And then there was Aunt Susan, my mother's sister. Susan had recently gone through an incredibly bitter divorce and a vicious custody battle that left her resentful of anyone else's happiness or potential success. She was a manipulative woman who thrived on drama. She latched onto Dylan's malicious rumors and amplified them tenfold. We were at a family funeral for a distant relative when I overheard her. She pulled my mother aside near the buffet table and whispered in her ear, "You need to distance yourself from Elijah," she hissed, her eyes darting toward me. "He's going to ruin your reputation in this town. He's going to drag Julian down with his debts. You need to protect your assets before he bleeds you dry." I only found out the full extent of this sabotage much later, when a mutual acquaintance had a few too many drinks and let the truth slip. I realized then that my parents weren't just disappointed in me. They were actively embarrassed by me. They viewed me as a financial and social liability. That was the moment something inside my chest truly hardened into stone. I stopped trying to win their approval. I stopped trying to explain myself or share my small victories. I focused entirely, obsessively, on my work. My business became my family. Nathan became the brother I never had. My employees, the people whose livelihoods depended on my leadership, were my priority. So when the heavy, cream-colored invitation to Julian's wedding arrived in my mailbox, I was honestly surprised. It was a formal, cold piece of cardstock, lacking any personal note, but it was an invitation nonetheless. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was an olive branch. A chance to finally bridge the massive gap between us. I thought my brother actually wanted me there to witness his happiness. I didn't know it was a trap designed to humiliate me. Let's go back to that $50,000 check. 6 months before the wedding, my mother showed up unannounced at my apartment. Not my corporate office, not my penthouse. My old, modest apartment that I still kept just to maintain the illusion of a simple life when family visited. She looked utterly distressed. She sat on my worn-out sofa, nervously wringing her hands, and spun this massive, tear-jerking sob story. She said Julian's fiancée, Jennifer, had incredibly expensive taste, that the wedding costs were spiraling completely out of control, and that my parents had tied up all their liquid assets in a bad real estate investment. She claimed Julian was stressing himself sick, working late nights at the law firm, desperately trying to figure out how to pay for the venue without going into massive debt. "He's your brother, Elijah," she pleaded, real tears welling up in her eyes and spilling over her perfectly powdered cheeks. "I know you don't have much, I know things are hard for you, but if you have any savings at all, please, please help him. He would be absolutely devastated if he had to cancel the Grand Harbor Hotel. It would break his heart. I looked at her, my own mother, sitting in my living room, lying directly to my face, expertly playing on my deepest sense of familial guilt. I didn't say a word about my wealth. I didn't tell her I owned the very hotel she was crying over. I just walked over to my desk, pulled out my personal checkbook, and wrote a check for $50,000. I handed it to her. She looked at the zeros, her eyes widening in genuine shock. She clearly hadn't expected me to have that kind of cash. But she quickly recovered, folded the check, shoved it deep into her designer leather purse, kissed my cheek with forced affection, and hurried out the door. She promised, looking me dead in the eye, that she wouldn't tell Julian, to spare his masculine pride. I felt good about it. I really did. I thought I was doing the noble, right thing for my little brother. But immediately after I received that devastating phone call from Amanda canceling my invitation, I called Nathan into my office. Nathan is my COO, my right hand, and the most fiercely loyal person I have ever met. I told him exactly what had just happened. Nathan's face turned a violent shade of red with anger. Without saying a word, he immediately pulled out his secure tablet and accessed the accounting records for the Henderson Miller wedding account within our system. "Elijah," Nathan said, his voice dangerously low, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Look at this. You need to see this." He slid the tablet across my heavy desk. The $50,000 had indeed been deposited into the Elegant Events account. Yes. But the total cost of their initial deposits for the venue and the premium vendors was only $35,000. I frowned, leaning forward to look at the numbers. Where did the other $15,000 go? I asked, confusion masking the rising tide of anger. Nathan pulled up the secondary ledger, his jaw tight. "Your mother requested a partial refund of the overpayment. She had it routed to a private secondary account. I ran a quick background check on the routing number just to be sure. Elijah, she used $15,000 of your money to book a 2-week, ultra-luxury family vacation at a resort in Hawaii." I stared at the glowing screen. The numbers and words blurred together. They didn't just take my hard-earned money to fund an extravagant wedding they deliberately banned me from. They took my money to go on a tropical vacation with Aunt Susan, Julian, and his fiancée. They used my cash to drink overpriced margaritas on a white sand beach, probably laughing about the failure of an older brother who unknowingly funded their lavish getaway, while simultaneously making sure I wasn't even allowed to sit in the back row to watch Julian walk down the aisle. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth would crack. A cold, absolute, terrifying fury washed over me, extinguishing every last ounce of warmth I had left for them. Any lingering guilt I had about ruining their big day vanished in that exact, crystal-clear second. They wanted to play games with my life. I was about to change the rules. I picked up my phone. It was time to systematically, ruthlessly dismantle the most important day of my brother's life. My first call was to Gabriel, the executive chef who oversees all premium catering operations for the Sterling Group. Gabriel is a culinary genius, a guy who treats food like a sacred religion and runs his kitchens with military precision. "Gabriel," I said, my voice steady and cold, "pull the Henderson Miller file for the 24th of this month." I heard him aggressively tapping on his mechanical keyboard. "Got it, boss. High-end seafood menu, truffle risotto, prime rib carving stations, the works. It's a massive spread. What's the change? Dietary restrictions?" "Cancel it," I ordered. "Cancel the food orders, cancel the waitstaff, cancel the equipment rental. I want you to blacklist the names Robert Henderson, Mary Henderson, and Julian Henderson from every single one of our affiliate restaurants and catering services nationwide." Gabriel paused. The typing stopped completely. He knew those names. He knew they were my family. "Elijah, are you absolutely sure about this? It's 3 weeks out. The fallout is going to be massive." "I've never been more sure of anything in my entire life, Gabe. Shut it down. Leave them with nothing." "Done," he said, slamming his hand on his desk. He didn't ask another question. He was always fiercely protective of me. Next, I called Lincoln, the tough, no-nonsense manager of our luxury transport fleet. Lincoln, the Henderson wedding on the 24th. They booked 6 Rolls-Royces for the bridal party and a vintage Porsche for the getaway car. Pull every single one of them. Pull them? Boss, that's a premium weekend slot. We could have rented those cars out 3 times over. I have drivers scheduled. I don't care about the lost revenue. Leave the cars in the garage. If anyone from that family calls asking about that reservation, tell them the company exercised its legal right to refuse service. Send them an official cancellation email right now. I sat back in my chair and watched the dominoes fall. Within 30 minutes, my companies had dispatched formal, legally binding cancellation notices to my parents' and Julian's email addresses. The stunning waterfront venue, the gourmet food, the imported flowers, the luxury cars, the hotel blocks holding reservations for out-of-town guests, gone. Wiped out with a few keystrokes. I didn't just take away their party. I stranded 200 wealthy, high-profile guests across the country with no hotel rooms and no transportation. I violently stripped my family of every single ounce of prestige and status they were so desperately trying to project to their country club friends. I walked over to the private bar in my office, poured myself a stiff glass of scotch, walked back over to the floor-to-ceiling window and waited. I knew the explosion was coming. I knew exactly how long it would take for my father, who obsessively checked his phone, to see his email inbox light up with disaster. 45 minutes later, my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID flashed my father's name. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my scotch, let it burn down my throat, and answered the phone. "Hello, Robert," I said. I didn't call him Dad. He hadn't been a dad to me in almost a decade. "Elijah," he screamed. The sound was so loud and piercing I had to pull the phone away from my ear. He was practically hyperventilating, his voice cracking with rage. I could hear my mother sobbing hysterically in the background. A chaotic mess of noise. "What the hell is going on? Did you do this? Did you somehow hack into my email account?" "Calm down," I said, my voice entirely flat, devoid of any emotion. "I didn't hack anything. What seems to be the problem?" "The wedding," he roared, coughing as he yelled. "Everything is completely canceled. We just got 6 different emails from 6 different companies saying our contracts are terminated. The hotel, the caterer, the cars, everything. And the venue planner said she spoke directly to the owner, and the owner canceled it. Are you behind this sick prank? Because if you are, I swear to God I will get my lawyer. I will get Julian to sue you into the ground." "It's not a prank, Robert," I interrupted, cutting through his hysterical threats. "It's business. You canceled my invitation. You decided I wasn't worthy to breathe the same air as your country club friends. So, I canceled your services." "You can't do that," he yelled, his voice echoing shrilly over the line. "We have ironclad contracts. We paid massive deposits. Who do you think you are? You're just a college dropout. You don't own the Grand Harbor Hotel. You don't own Symphonic Catering. You run a pathetic little party planning service out of a shoebox." I let him rant for another 10 seconds. I let him hurl every insult he had stored up for the last 8 years. And then I dropped the hammer. "Check the signature on the parent company of every single vendor you booked, Robert. Look closely at the fine print. Sterling Hospitality Group. Check the state business registry. Check the Forbes list of fastest-growing private companies. We were number 17 last year. I am the CEO. I am the sole 100% owner. I own the magnificent venue you wanted to show off in. I own the luxury cars you wanted to ride in. And I own the food you were planning to eat using the money you stole from me to go to Hawaii." The line went dead silent. The absolute, suffocating silence of total shock. The only sound was my mother's dramatic crying suddenly cutting off into a sharp, terrifying gasp. They had me on speakerphone. They both heard it. "Hawaii?" my father whispered. His voice was suddenly very small, stripped of all its bluster and arrogance. "Yeah, Hawaii. Did you really think I wouldn't track where a $50,000 check went? Did you think I was that stupid? Congratulations, Robert. You just uninvited the person who was secretly financing your golden child's entire wedding, and you got caught embezzling from him to take Aunt Susan on vacation. The wedding is off. Have a nice day. I hung up. I didn't block his number. I wanted to see how many times he would call back. The phone started ringing immediately. Once, twice, 10 times, 20 times. I just let it ring, watching his name flash violently on the screen, feeling an overwhelming, deeply satisfying sense of vindictive peace wash over me. The next morning, the panic reached a fever pitch. Julian bypassed my cell and called my corporate office line. My assistant, knowing the situation, put him through. Elijah, please. Julian's voice was frantic, breathless. Gone was the smug, arrogant lawyer who constantly mocked my business. Gone was the golden child. He sounded like a terrified, cornered little boy. You have to fix this. Jennifer is having a complete nervous breakdown. She hasn't stopped crying for 12 hours. Her parents are threatening to call off the wedding entirely because of the embarrassment. We have 200 guests flying in from all over the country. We can't find another venue. Every single decent place is fully booked for the season. You have to give us the Grand Harbor back. Please, man. I don't have to do anything, Julian, I replied, casually typing an email as I spoke to him, the clicking of my keyboard serving as a metronome to his panic. You made a choice. You decided I wasn't good enough to stand in your wedding photos. You decided I was an embarrassment. Actions have consequences. It was Mom and Dad's idea, he pleaded, instantly, cowardly throwing our parents under the bus. Typical Julian. They said Aunt Susan was right, that you would just cause a scene and embarrass us in front of Jennifer's wealthy family. I didn't want to ban you, I swear. But you went along with it. You didn't defend me, and you gladly spent the money I gave you. You're a lawyer, Julian. You understand how liability works. You broke the social contract first. He started crying. Actual, desperate tears over the phone. It was pathetic. I hung up on him. But Julian was desperate. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Wyatt, a regional manager for a competing, highly sought-after venue down the coast, a place called the Ocean Terrace. What Julian didn't know, what nobody outside my inner circle knew yet, was that Sterling Hospitality Group had quietly finalized a hostile takeover of the Ocean Terrace just 3 days prior. The ink was barely dry on the contracts. Mr. Sterling, Wyatt said over the phone, completely unaware of my family connection to the situation. I have a highly agitated, almost hysterical client in my lobby, a Mr. Julian Henderson. He's practically throwing an open checkbook at me, begging to book the terrace for the 24th. He says his previous venue screwed him over illegally. How do you want me to handle this, sir? Do we squeeze him for a premium rate? I couldn't help but smile. The universe truly has a beautiful, poetic sense of irony. Wyatt, I said, leaning into the microphone, tell Mr. Henderson that the Ocean Terrace is unfortunately fully booked for a private corporate retreat that weekend. And tell him that the new owner of the Ocean Terrace sends his deepest regrets. I could hear the confusion in Wyatt's voice, but he was a professional who followed orders. Understood, sir. 10 minutes later, my personal phone blew up with a barrage of text messages from Julian. It was a string of furious curses, followed by frantic begging, followed by more unhinged curses. He was cornered. He had nowhere else to go. Every single premium venue in a 100-mile radius was either owned by me or fully booked for the wedding season. They were trapped in the humiliating mess they had created, suffocating under the weight of their own arrogance. I let them sweat for 48 agonizing hours. I let them experience the sheer, unadulterated terror of facing their prestigious guests, Jennifer's wealthy, judgmental family, and the total ruin of their own reputations. By Thursday morning, my mother was leaving frantic, sobbing voicemails on my phone every hour, weeping uncontrollably, apologizing over and over, begging for any shred of mercy. My father had stopped calling, likely crushed by the sheer embarrassment of his impotence. I called Amanda back into my office. She looked terrified, clutching her clipboard, probably thinking I was finally going to fire her for being the messenger. Instead, I gave her a crisp piece of paper. Amanda, call the Henderson family. Tell them I am willing to offer them a solution to save face. But these are my strict, non-negotiable terms. I listed them out clearly. First, they would absolutely not be getting the Grand Harbor Hotel. That ship had sailed. They would be downgraded to the Grandview Manor. This is my smallest, least impressive venue. Capacity for 80 people maximum. They would have the humiliating task of uninviting over half their elite guest list. Second, no premium catering. They would get the basic chicken and pasta package. House flowers only. No truffles, no Wagyu. And definitely no Rolls-Royces. They could drive themselves. Third, the cost for this drastically reduced, basic package would not be the standard market rate. It would be $200,000, paid in full immediately via wire transfer. A massive premium rate for a massive headache. And finally, the most important, non-negotiable condition. Tell them, I instructed Amanda, locking eyes with her, that I require a formal, in-person apology from Robert, Mary, and Julian. They will meet me this Saturday at the Harborview Resort, my premier property. If they attempt to negotiate, or if they refuse even a single condition, they can get married in a municipal courthouse. Amanda swallowed hard, her eyes wide, took the paper with trembling hands, and scurried out of my office. An hour later, my desk phone rang. It was Amanda. Mr. Sterling? They agreed. They didn't even argue. They agreed to absolutely everything. Your father transferred the $200,000 into the corporate account 10 minutes ago. They will be at the Harborview Resort on Saturday at exactly 2 p.m. I hung up the phone and looked out at the city, the rain having finally cleared to reveal bright sunlight. The storm was fully raging in their lives, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one getting rained on. I was the one controlling the weather. Saturday was going to be the day of reckoning. I was finally going to force them to sit in the house that I built, look at the man they had thrown away like garbage, and painfully realize that he was the only one in the world who could save them. Saturday arrived with a clear, bright blue sky. I was standing in the private VIP dining room of the Harborview Resort, my flagship property. The walls were lined with dark mahogany wood. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting a warm, expensive glow over the massive oak table in the center of the room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I had a perfect view of the private marina where million-dollar yachts were docked. I was wearing a simple, dark tailored suit. No tie. I didn't need to dress up to impress anyone anymore. I already owned the building. Down in the security control room, Nathan was watching the cameras. He texted me exactly when my family pulled up to the main valet station. They didn't arrive in a luxury sedan. They arrived in my father's 5-year-old SUV. I watched the live feed on my tablet as the uniformed valet opened the doors for them. My father stepped out first. He looked around the pristine, palm tree-lined entrance, and I could physically see his shoulders slump. This place was completely out of his league. My mother stepped out next, clutching her designer purse tightly against her chest. She looked terrified. Julian and his fiancée, Jennifer, followed behind them. Julian was wearing one of his expensive lawyer suits, the kind he usually used to intimidate people in deposition rooms, but today it looked like a Halloween costume on a scared kid. A concierge in a crisp white uniform approached them, checked their names off a gold-plated tablet, and escorted them through the grand lobby. I watched their eyes dart around. They saw the indoor waterfall. They saw the businessmen closing million-dollar deals over scotch at the lobby bar. Every step they took deeper into my resort stripped away another layer of their completely unearned arrogance. By the time the heavy oak doors of the VIP dining room opened, they looked like entirely different people. They looked small. My father walked in first. He tried to puff out his chest, trying to project that old patriarchal authority he used to wield over me, but his eyes betrayed him. He saw me standing by the window. He saw the two waiters standing perfectly still in the corners of the room, waiting for my absolute command. Elijah, my father said. His voice was raspy. It lacked all the thunder from our phone call. Robert, I replied. I gestured to the chairs around the table. Sit down. They sat. My mother wouldn't even make eye contact with me. She stared down at her hands in her lap. Julian looked sick, his face a pale shade of gray. Jennifer, Julian's fiancée, just looked confused and deeply uncomfortable. She clearly had no idea what was actually going on. I walked over and took the seat at the head of the table. I didn't offer them anything to drink. I didn't make small talk. I looked directly at my brother. So, I began, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. You wanted a venue. My father cleared his throat loudly. He placed his hands flat on the table, trying to stop them from shaking. Elijah, we paid the $200,000 you demanded. We met your price. Now we need to finalize the details for the Grandview Manor. The wedding is in 2 weeks. We are out of time. I didn't blink. I reached into my leather briefcase sitting on the floor next to me and pulled out a single manila folder. I dropped it flat onto the center of the table. The sharp slap of the cardboard against the wood made my mother physically flinch. Before we discuss your new venue, I said, we are going to discuss your accounting practices. Because in the business world, I don't sign contracts with thieves. Julian's head snapped up. Thieves? Elijah, watch your mouth. I opened the folder. I slid the top piece of paper across the smooth wood directly toward my mother. It was a printed bank statement. Mary, I said, using her first name, would you like to explain to Jennifer how you afforded that luxurious 2-week family vacation to Hawaii last month? Because I have the routing numbers right here. You took the $50,000 I gave you to help your son, you diverted $15,000 into your personal checking account, and you bought plane tickets for yourself, Robert, Julian, and Aunt Susan. Jennifer gasped. She turned sharply to look at Julian. Hawaii? You told me your firm gave you a bonus to pay for that trip. You told me it was a gift for passing the bar. Julian swallowed hard. He couldn't look his future wife in the eye. Jen, I can explain. There is nothing to explain. I cut in, my voice cold and hard. They stole my money. They used it to go to a beach. And then, as a thank you, they called my company and permanently banned me from the wedding. You kept my cash and threw me in the trash. My father stood up. He was desperate to regain control. Listen to me, Elijah. You are blowing this completely out of proportion. We always planned to pay you back. You have plenty of money now anyway. It's not a big deal. You owe us for raising you. We gave you a roof over your head. I was going to leave you my inheritance before you disrespected us by dropping out of school. I actually laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Your inheritance? Robert, your entire net worth wouldn't cover the landscaping budget for this resort. Just as the words left my mouth, the heavy doors to the dining room swung open. My assistant hadn't announced anyone, but the man walking in didn't need an announcement. It was Carter. Carter is a billionaire real estate mogul from Chicago and my primary silent partner in the Coastal Expansion Project. He is a man who moves markets just by making a phone call. Carter walked in casually, wearing a custom Italian suit, holding a stack of financial reports. He completely ignored my family. He didn't even register they were sitting there. Elijah, Carter said, his booming voice filling the room. I just reviewed the acquisition numbers for the new downtown properties. The board is thrilled. Your projections were dead on. We are looking at a 40% profit margin by Q3. You are a genius, kid. I'm wiring the extra $20 million into the holding account tomorrow. The entire room froze. My family stopped breathing. My father recognized Carter instantly. Everyone in the financial world knew Carter. My father had spent his entire career trying to get a meeting with men like Carter, and he had failed every single time. Carter finally looked down at the table, noticing the pale, terrified faces of my parents. He squinted at my father. Wait a minute. I know you. Robert Henderson, right? From the mid-level accounting firm in the city. We played golf once 5 years ago. You sliced every drive into the woods. My father looked like he was going to pass out. He slowly nodded. Yes, Mr. Carter. It's an honor to see you. Carter looked from my father to me, completely confused. Elijah, why are you having lunch with an entry-level accountant? Are we buying his firm? No, Carter, I said, keeping my eyes locked on my father's completely defeated face. He is just a client, a very difficult client. We were just finishing up. Carter shrugged, tossing the reports onto the end of the table. All right, well, wrap it up. We have a tea time at 4, and my pilot is warming up the jet. Don't keep me waiting, boss. Carter walked out of the room, the doors shutting heavily behind him. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of an entire worldview collapsing. My parents had spent 8 years convincing themselves I was a pathetic, struggling loser who needed their pity. In exactly 30 seconds, Carter had destroyed that illusion permanently. They finally understood. I wasn't just a guy who owned a few party buildings. I was the guy the billionaires called boss. The reality of the situation crashed down on them with the weight of a concrete building. My father slowly sank back down into his leather chair. All the fight, all the arrogant bluster, was completely drained from his body. He looked 10 years older than when he had walked into the room. My mother broke first. She put her face in her hands and started to cry. But this time, it wasn't the theatrical, manipulative crying she used to get her way. These were the ugly, heavy tears of genuine regret. Elijah, she sobbed, her voice muffled by her hands. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. We were so wrong about you. We listened to all the wrong people. I didn't soften. You listened to Aunt Susan. You listened to Dylan. You listened to people who wanted to see me fail so they could feel better about their own miserable lives. And you chose to believe them over your own flesh and blood. Julian finally spoke. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The golden child was completely broken. It wasn't just them, Elijah, Julian said quietly. It was me. I let them believe it. I looked at him. What are you talking about? Julian wiped a hand across his face. When Dylan started spreading those rumors about you being broke, I knew they weren't entirely true, but I didn't stop him. I actually encouraged it. Why? I demanded. Because I was terrified of you, Julian confessed, his voice shaking. You always had so much courage. You walked away from Harvard. You took massive risks. I never had that kind of guts. I just did exactly what Mom and Dad told me to do. I became a lawyer because they wanted a lawyer. I make a good salary, sure, but I hate my job. I'm drowning in student debt and credit card bills trying to keep up this rich guy image for the family. When Mom said you were a failure, it made me feel like I was finally winning at something. I was jealous of your freedom. I stared at my younger brother. I saw the absolute exhaustion in his eyes, the crushing weight of living a lie. Suddenly, Jennifer stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Her face was flushed with anger. She looked down at Julian, then at my parents. You people are unbelievable, Jennifer said, her voice vibrating with pure rage. Julian, you lied to me about the Hawaii trip. You lied to me about your brother. You told me Elijah was a deadbeat who refused to come to the wedding because he hated our family. You told me he didn't care about us. She turned to me, her eyes softening. Elijah, I had absolutely no idea. I never would have allowed them to take your money and cancel your invitation. I am so deeply ashamed of how my future husband has treated you. She looked back at Julian. If we are going to get married, this ends today. The lying ends today. The fake country club act ends today. You are going to fix this with your brother, or there is no wedding at all. Do you understand me? Julian scrambled to his feet, reaching for her hand. Jen, I promise. I swear I'm done. I'm so sorry. Jennifer pulled her hand away, crossed her arms, and stood firmly by the window. She had drawn her line in the sand. I let them sit in the uncomfortable silence for a long time. I needed them to feel the absolute bottom before I offered them a way out. All right? I finally said, leaning forward and folding my hands on the table. Here is how this is going to work. The $200,000 you wired me covers the Grandview Manor. It covers the basic chicken and pasta catering. Covers a standard open bar. It does not cover the Rolls-Royces, but I will authorize Lincoln to send 2 standard black sedans for the bridal party. That is my final offer regarding the business. My father nodded quickly, eager to just have the nightmare over. Yes, thank you, Elijah. That is more than fair. We accept. I'm not finished, I said sharply. That handles the business side. Now we handle the family side. I looked directly into my mother's tear-streaked face. Mary, you are going to write a check to a charity of my choosing for $15,000 to cover the money you embezzled for your vacation. You will do it by Monday. She nodded frantically. Yes, absolutely. I will go to the bank on Monday morning. I turned to my father. Robert, you are never going to threaten me with your inheritance again. I don't want a single dime of your money. I want you to look at me, right now, and admit that I built my life without your help. My father swallowed hard. He looked me in the eye. You did, Elijah. You built an empire. I was a fool. I am incredibly proud of what you've accomplished, and I am deeply ashamed of how I treated you. It was the first time in my entire life I had ever heard my father admit he was wrong. Felt strange. It didn't heal all the wounds, but it stopped the bleeding. Finally, I looked at Julian. He was standing near Jennifer, looking like a man waiting for his execution. Julian, I said calmly, I am going to provide the venue. I am going to make sure the staff treats you and Jennifer with absolute respect. I am going to make sure your wedding happens. But I am doing it for Jennifer, because she deserves a good day. As for you and me, we have a very long way to go before we are brothers again. Julian stepped forward. His eyes were red. I know I have to earn your trust back. I will spend the rest of my life trying to do that, Elijah. I swear. He paused, his voice cracking. But I have to ask you one thing. Mom and Dad uninvited you, but it's my wedding, and I want you there. Please, come to the wedding. I looked at him. I saw the desperate, honest plea in his face. He wasn't acting anymore. He was just a guy who realized he was about to lose the only brother he had. I'll be there, I said. 3 weeks later, I stood in the back of the manicured gardens at the Grandview Manor. The late afternoon sun was casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. It was my smallest venue, but my staff had transformed it into a masterpiece. The white wooden chairs were perfectly aligned. The flower arrangements, though not the exotic imports they originally wanted, were stunning and elegant. The string quartet was playing softly in the background. It was a beautiful, intimate setting. I was wearing a sharp, custom-fitted charcoal suit. As the 200 guests began to arrive and find their seats, I could feel the whispers. Word had spread through the family grapevine like wildfire. Aunt Susan was there, sitting in the third row, looking incredibly uncomfortable. She kept glancing back at me, her face tight with forced politeness. The cousins, the uncles, the country club friends, they all knew. They knew I wasn't the broke, pathetic dropout anymore. They knew they were sitting on my property, drinking my wine, eating my food. I didn't gloat. I didn't walk around handing out business cards. I just stood quietly in the back watching the logistics. I gave a subtle nod to my catering manager, who immediately signaled the waiters to begin passing out the champagne flutes. Everything ran with absolute, flawless precision. When the music changed, everyone stood up. I watched Julian walk down the aisle. He looked nervous, but when he saw Jennifer walking toward him in her white dress, his entire face lit up. I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. Despite all the anger, all the betrayal, I was genuinely glad he was getting his happy ending. The ceremony was short and sweet. When they finally kissed, the crowd erupted into applause. I clapped along with them. For the first time in almost a decade, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The reception was held under a massive white tent on the main lawn. The sun went down, and the fairy lights strung across the ceiling glowed like stars. The basic chicken and pasta package was executed so perfectly by Gabriel's team that people were asking for the recipe. After dinner, the clinking of glasses signaled the start of the speeches. The maid of honor went first, telling funny stories about Jennifer in college. Then the room quieted down. It was time for the best man. Julian hadn't just asked me to attend. He had asked me to stand by his side. I walked up to the microphone stand at the front of the dance floor. 200 faces turned to look at me. I could see the nervous tension in my parents' eyes. They probably thought I was going to use this moment to publicly humiliate them, to expose the Hawaii trip and the canceled invitation to the entire crowd. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces, and then I looked directly at my brother and his new wife. When Julian and I were kids, I began, my voice steady and clear. He always followed me around. Whatever tree I climbed, he tried to climb. Whatever game I played, he wanted to play. Somewhere along the way, as we grew up, we lost that connection. The world told us we had to compete. The world told us there was only one narrow path to success, and if you stepped off it, you were lost. I paused, letting the words sink in. The room was dead silent. I took a different path, I continued, and for a long time my family thought I was lost. But what I learned out there, building my life from the ground up, is that true success isn't about meeting other people's expectations. It's not about the title on your business card or the size of your bank account. It's about building something meaningful. It's about finding the strength to build a foundation so solid that when the storms come, you can provide shelter for the people you love. I looked at my parents. They were both crying quietly. "Julian," I said, turning back to my brother, "you are a good man. You have a beautiful wife. You have a long, bright future ahead of you. Don't waste it trying to impress people who don't matter. Build your own foundation, and know that no matter what happens, your big brother is always going to be right here, ready to help you carry the load." I raised my glass of champagne. "To Julian and Jennifer, may your love be the strongest thing you ever build." The crowd erupted. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was genuine, roaring applause. Julian stood up from his table, walked over to me, and wrapped his arms around me in a tight, crushing hug. He buried his face in my shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for saving me." Later that night, as the band played a slow jazz tune and the older guests began to head home, I stepped out onto the stone terrace to get some fresh air. The ocean breeze was cool and sharp. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see my father walking out of the shadows. He looked tired, but the heavy, arrogant tension he used to carry in his shoulders was gone. He walked over and stood next to me, leaning his forearms on the stone railing, looking out at the dark water. We stood in silence for a few minutes, just two men listening to the waves. "That was a hell of a speech, Elijah," he finally said quietly. "I meant every word of it," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I know you did. You showed more class and character in those 3 minutes than I have shown in my entire life." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I wanted to talk to you about Aunt Susan. I know what she said to your mother at the funeral all those years ago. I know she poisoned the well. Susan went through a terrible divorce. The custody battle for her kids completely destroyed her mental state. She became a bitter, toxic person who couldn't stand to see anyone else succeed. But that is no excuse for me. I was your father. I was supposed to protect you from people like her. Instead, I let my own pride blind me. I wanted a son who looked perfect on paper so I could brag at the club. I failed you, Elijah. I failed you completely." I looked at the side of his face, the deep lines around his eyes. He wasn't a monster. He was just a deeply flawed man who had been brainwashed by a society that valued appearances over reality. "You did fail me, Dad," I said. It was the first time I had called him Dad in 8 years. "But you're here now, and you apologized. That counts for something." He looked at me, tears glistening in his eyes. He reached out and placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. "I am so proud of you, son," he said, his voice thick. "Not because you're a billionaire, Not because you own all this. I'm proud of the man you became. You had every right to destroy this family, and instead you put us back together. You are a better man than I will ever be. I covered his hand with mine and squeezed it. Family is family, Dad, even when it takes them a little while to figure it out. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, washing the skyscrapers in brilliant gold light. I was back in my corner office by 7 a.m. The wedding was over. The drama was finished. It was time to get back to work. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat down at my desk, opening my laptop to review the final acquisition documents for Carter's new coastal properties. My personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. I picked it up. It was a text message from Julian. I don't know how to thank you for yesterday. It was the best day of my life. I know I have a lot of work to do to make things right, but I want to start now. Jennifer and I are back from our honeymoon in 2 weeks. Can we buy you dinner? A real dinner? I read the message twice. A genuine smile spread across my face. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the power. It was about respect. It was about breaking down the walls of arrogance and forcing the people I loved to see the truth. I spent 8 years building an empire in the dark, enduring the insults, the isolation, and the betrayal. I was the Harvard dropout, the family disappointment. But sitting there in my office, looking at the city I was helping to build, I realized the most important lesson of my life. Success is absolutely the best revenge. But true strength isn't just about proving your haters wrong. It's about being strong enough, secure enough in your own worth, to forgive them when they finally realize their mistake. It's about having the power to crush them and choosing to lift them up instead. I tapped the screen of my phone and typed my reply to my younger brother. Dinner sounds great. Welcome to the family business. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It's been a long, painful journey, but telling it here feels like a massive weight has finally been lifted off my chest. I hope this resonated with you in some way. I hope it showed you that your worth is never defined by the people who refuse to see it, even if those people are your own family. You have to build your own foundation. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had a family member completely misjudge your path or take advantage of your kindness? Let me know down in the comments. I'm going to be reading and replying to as many of them as I can. Now, if you are still here hearing the sound of my voice, you are part of an incredibly special group. You are the resilient ones. I want you to go down to the comments section right now and type the letter W. W stands for winner. That is our secret code. That tells me that you are part of the 1% club. The amazing people who stay until the very end and who understand the true value of respect and hard work. If my story brought you any value today, please hit that like button and follow the channel. We are building a community here of people who don't give up, and I would love for you to be a part of the next chapter. Stay strong, know your worth, and I'll see you in the next one.